Hey, welcome to another edition of the Leadership Studio, our nonprofit leadership studio. And this is a focus on fundraising and a great guest tonight. We have Tara Black with the Houston Area Women's Center, one of the best fundraisers in town, one of my good buddies. Tara, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to learn from you about fundraising and all sorts of things. But if you're writing the same question, I think you've done this before, the same question, if you're writing the book on fundraising, what are some of the big chapters for the Tara Black story on fundraising?
I'd say relationship building. You can't fundraise until you've built relationships. There's a belief that you can pick up the phone and call someone once or meet with them once and they'll write you a check for $100,000. That very rarely happens. Actually, I've only had that happen once.
That has happened though.
That has happened once. It hasn't happened since then. And it's great when it happens or if it happens, but typically it takes, depending on the gift level, it could take a year to cultivate a relationship or even longer with some of your larger gifts.
And of course it depends upon how well they know the organization, and maybe how well they know the CEO and or another board member.
Absolutely.
But for someone who's brand new, doesn't know much about an organization, doesn't know you, it's almost like a friendship, right? You become buddies first, and then maybe they give.
It's a very long and tedious process.
Yeah, but you like it.
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yep.
What else is important outside of relationship building, would you say?
Having a very engaged CEO and board. I've had probably some of my best success based on collaborations with, CEOs and board members. For board members, their spheres of influence is very important because your typical board member knows so many people, and I usually ask, if you open the door, if you can arrange that first meeting, I'm able to take it from there. So that's very important as well.
What, in your ideal world, and there are lots of different types of CEOs, but in your ideal world, when you think about the relationship between a chief fundraising officer and a chief executive officer, what should be happening there within the nonprofit environment?
The two should be collaborating on a regular basis. Actually, I've seen it where the CEO has his or her closest relationship within the organization with the chief development officer, because on average, you're spending time, I'd say 3 to 4 days a week.
Yeah, because in an ideal world, you're out of the office, you're meeting with lots of people, you're developing those relationships.
If I'm behind my desk, I'm not doing my job. If the CEO is behind her desk, she's not doing her job, because that means we're not out in the community and raising dollars.
Yeah, I always like to think of it either being out and about or being on my couch with other people in the chairs in my office, because and so when I'm not checking my email, I'm really doing my job, right? Because I'm out there meeting with people. So that's good. When you think about a strong fundraising organization, what does the whole organization look like, Tara?
So just for the fundraising portion of it, well, I think you have to be well staffed in the right areas. I think there's a tendency to think that bigger is better. Not always, but you should at least be adequately staffed. At my current organization, it's myself and 4 other people that work in the development office. So there's a manager of corporations and foundations, an associate director of special events, an annual fund manager, and a database coordinator. I would actually like to add at least 2 more people to our department. We're responsible for raising $3.2 million a year. And because we're such a small department, I'm not spending as much time as I'd like to spend fundraising. And that's what I enjoy doing.
And who's writing the proposals? Is that the manager?
Our manager of corporations, foundations, and major gifts.
Oh, very good.
She's very talented. We're very lucky to have her.
That's a good position, right? You need a good person in that position.
Yes, and actually prior to that person joining us, the position was vacant for 7 months, and I absorbed all of those responsibilities. So again, when you have a really small shop, sometimes it's a little difficult. I met with our board chair and our vice chair of development a couple of weeks ago, and we were just having a conversation, recapping our Race Against Violence and some of the other projects that we're currently working on. And they were really surprised when I explained what an average day looks like for me. And as a chief development officer, you wouldn't necessarily imagine me loading up items on a U-Haul for a race or stuffing envelopes, but because we're such a small organization, everyone has to just jump in and get the job done.
Wow. One of the things that the class is reading about this week is the role of the board, the role of the trustees. Talk about a board and what's your expectations from the development viewpoint of a board, because sometimes you'll hear CEOs and development directors say, oh, my board is not raising money at all. Talk about that and then what your expectations are.
It is the board's responsibility to give and to get. And so there's a board minimum with the Houston Area Women's Center of $5,000, but there's also the expectation that board members will solicit gifts on behalf of the agency as well. In an ideal world, your board would be completely engaged. I'd say maybe a third of our board is truly engaged in fundraising and actively fundraise on a regular basis. I'd like for it to be the entire board.
You almost, I've heard sometimes CEOs say, oh, my board doesn't raise any money, but in a sense, you almost have to guide them, don't you, though?
Yes.
As a development department, you have to figure out how do we make these people raise money, because they don't do it on their own.
I think it's important with board members to start with people that they know and feel comfortable with. Give them some easy wins, maybe a few renewals, let them have some successes under their belt, and then I think it's a lot easier as you move towards soliciting some of the more difficult prospects.
Wow. And when you have a board member and you're saying the give or get is $5,000, obviously it's mostly a suggestion, right? And obviously, from the development and CEO's viewpoint, you want way more than that.
Yes.
And so, in organizations that you've been a part of, organizations that I've been a part of, you see on a regular basis, you see board members who are giving $100,000 and plus in sort of different ways. Is this how organizations truly get ahead, is by having these types of board members?
I think it's important, especially with smaller nonprofits, that there is at least a small percentage of your board that has capacity.
Yeah.
I would say the best board that I've ever worked with was the Houston Symphony Board.
Oh, yeah.
With many board members that had great capacity, incredible capacity.
And how does that work? I mean, how do you get them to, is it all about that relationship that you have with them?
It's all about the relationship that the Chief Development Officer has with board members, but it is also about the relationship that your CEO has with board members. I found peer-to-peer fundraising with boards to be the most effective. They'll respond a lot more quickly to one of their peers than they will to me. And so I utilize that when there's a board member who's not responding to calls or emails. I'll pick up the phone and call the vice chair of development, and he makes the call or he sends the email, and then there's an instant response.
How does the development committee work at the Houston Area Women's Center and with you?
So it's the Marketing and Development Committee, and they're tasked with really overseeing the development plan, providing a much higher level vision of what our development efforts and marketing efforts could or should look like. It's a really engaged group of individuals. We're actually meeting in a couple of weeks for a 40th anniversary planning retreat, where we'll basically lay out our development plan for 2017 and also build the marketing plan for that as well.
And how many members of the board sit on the development committee of the board?
We have 12 board members, and then we have several non-board members as well. members of the community that are engaged with the agency.
And how do you choose them?
One is a hotline volunteer. They typically come to us based on referrals from board members, or sometimes individuals will reach out to us directly. And, we'll interview them. We'll set up meetings with board members to see if it's appropriate to add someone to that committee. But we really rely on referrals.
How big is your board right now?
There are 30 board members.
That's a good sized board. Yeah. And how often do you meet with them, say individually?
It just depends. I spend the most amount of time with the vice chair of development and with the individuals that serve on our underwriting committees. It varies. There's some that I meet with monthly. There's some that I meet with quarterly. It just depends on our relationship and the prospects that we're soliciting.
I try to meet with each member. We have about 35 members of our board. I try to meet with each one of them maybe 2 times a year. Is there sort of a better or worse sort of a number that you want to see your CEO meeting with the board?
I think the CEO should meet with board members on a regular basis. So if there's an opportunity for you to increase the number of interactions or engagements with your board members, how many times a year are you having cultivation events? So of course you're meeting with them one-on-one, but there should be board cultivation events that are planned throughout. Yes.
Social occasions. I do try to have a happy hour with the chair of my board once a month.
Okay.
Because he always pays.
That's
It's
good.
It's always
all the more reason to go.
Very good. When you look around Houston and you see high-performing fundraising organizations, what are some of the organizations that come to mind for you?
I think many of the arts organizations are high performing, just solely based on the fact that they're arts organizations. I would say higher ed as well. There's
Rice
a lot of
University
support.
seems to do pretty well.
Rice, the University of Houston, does very well. St. Thomas does exceptionally well. And then, of course, there's healthcare. MD Anderson is just blowing everyone else in the medical center away.
Yeah. We've had the head of Texas Children's Hospital, head of development here, John Scales.
He's wonderful.
He does a good job too, doesn't he?
And he's retiring.
Wow, maybe you could get that job, huh?
Maybe.
I think he has like a staff of 300, right? Something like that. So that's an amazing
He has
thing.
my ideal chief development officer position.
300 staff working for you?
300 staff, and you spend all of your time out of the office meeting with prospects.
And a great board as well.
An incredible board.
So when you look at boards around town, any organizations that maybe we would not expect have wonderful boards that you see and you think, hey, that's a pretty good fundraising board? Any that come to mind for you?
You know, I would, again, mention some of the healthcare boards because they're so prominent. And of course, the arts, again.
When you look at, children at risk and Houston Area Women's Center and the food bank and some of these other types of things, is it harder, do you think, to attract board members who are going to raise a lot of money for these types of organizations?
I think it is definitely much more difficult because, our organization isn't considered one of the sexy organizations or places to be seen. And because of the nature of our work and the fact that we support victims of domestic and sexual violence, it's still very taboo. And people just kind of steer clear of our agency. I think there has to be truly a passion for the work that we do. And I will say that our board is extremely passionate about the work that we do in the community.
We had Diane Cervenka from Catholic Charities on a couple weeks ago. And she talked a lot about some of the events that they do. Do you guys do many events, or do you do? I know you do the one big event. Are there other events that you do?
To special events. I'm not a fan of special events because I think there's a really low return on investment. We have two major events. There's a Race Against Violence, which was March 5th of this year with over 3,000 participants.
That's good.
It's phenomenal.
Did you make a lot of money on that?
We raised $275,000
Net?
and gross.
Gross, yeah.
There's so much work that goes into it, but it's actually one of my favorite events because of the grassroots elements of it, and almost everyone can participate because your entry fee is $25, $30, unlike our gala, which is coming up in a few weeks, April 29th, where our tables start at $6,000.
Yeah.
But I'm not a huge fan of fundraisers. However, I understand that without those fundraisers, we'd have to get really creative in terms of where does that revenue come from. We'd have to identify.
It's unrestricted revenue, which is
it's
a big
unrestricted.
deal. Yeah. Now, I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but you guys have traditionally you've had some comedians, right?
Yes, we have.
And some of those did not turn out as well. Is this secret stuff?
So we've moved in a completely different direction. Last year we had this phenomenal band out of Atlanta, Georgia, Party on the Moon. They're coming back by popular demand again this year. The year prior we had Margaret Cho, and that didn't go over very well.
She was a little too risque. Is that what it was?
Very vulgar, very risque, definitely not in line with our mission. And although we'd had conversations with her agent about the content of her performance, she went in a completely different direction and actually offended many of our donors. I stood out in the foyer area of the hotel and took the brunt of many of those comments. There were people that were extremely offended and very disappointed.
And it's not hard to offend donors in some ways too, but I know she did. I mean, I've heard some of the stuff, and it was easy for her to offend donors.
Yes.
But like we had Jay Leno, and he even said a few things, but I think in comparison to what.
Well, I think Margaret looked around at the room and just said, "I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm going to go for it."
Good for her. Bad for you, right?
Bad for us.
Wow. Tell me about your background, Tara. How did you end up doing the job that you're doing?
It's a really interesting story.
Because you're from the Carolinas, right?
I'm from South Carolina. I moved here 14 years ago randomly. I didn't know anyone here. I worked in retail sales at the time for Gap.
For the Gap?
For the Gap.
Just like Reality Bites, you came to Houston to work for the Gap.
I transferred my position from Florence, South Carolina to Houston.
Well, that was a good move, though.
It was a very good move because shortly after I moved here, I met the Vice President of Human Resources of the Houston Rockets. And it started with a conversation in the bathroom about hair, of all things. At the end of the conversation, she gave me her business card and said, "You're the type of, individual that we want on our team. If you're ever looking for a job, send me your resume." She got to the door and said, "You know what, never mind, just send me your resume."
Wow.
And so I spent almost 5 years working for the Houston Rockets, but in professional sports.
During a good time you were with them, right?
During a good time, Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming, and actually I have a really neat story about Yao Ming. I was on the elevator and it stopped on whatever floor and he got on.
Did he have to crouch down?
He did.
Yeah.
And so he's here and my head is literally here, barely at his waist. And it was surreal. And in that position, I
and
actually
since then, you and Yao have been like this? Is that?
Oh, we're besties.
Yeah.
We
exactly.
are. But, I got goosebumps every day walking into Toyota Center. It was a phenomenal experience. But also, I burnt out pretty fast. And when you're working 42 or 44 home games, and
that's a lot.
Every other day in between, you burn out quickly.
Yeah.
And I needed to do some soul searching and was talking to a very good friend of mine that we met years prior at the University of South Carolina, where I worked in the advancement office at the University of South Carolina part-time. And she said, have you ever considered a career in development? It's a transferable skill set that you have. You've worked in sales. You should consider it. And I saw a position posted with the Houston Symphony and randomly applied for it. And David Rockoff, who is still my mentor and very good friend, took a chance and hired me, understanding that I did not have a development background, but he said he felt like I was smart and I could learn. And I rose through the ranks there pretty quickly and was recruited away by St. Luke's Episcopal Health System. Spent a couple of years there when the opportunity presented itself to become a Chief Development Officer with Houston Area Women's Center. So I walked into that interview, and there were 2 Houston Symphony board members sitting there that I'd worked very closely with.
So then you knew you had the job, if you wanted it.
I was a little confident.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And how long have you been with the Houston Area Women's Center?
2.5 years.
Wow. And so when you, let's say 5 years down the road when you're ready to move, what type of organization is going to be a good move for you for your career? Do you want to stay with fundraising, do you think? I mean, you've had such a good background.
I would definitely like to stay in development. So thus far, I've worked for a major arts institution, a major healthcare institution. I've worked in social services, and so I'd like to perhaps try higher ed.
Oh, yeah. So that might be a nice thing, right? Yeah, do that. All right, well, I see that the Twitterverse is quite active right now, and so let's go ahead and, okay, here's one that's, Rocio Beisa wants to know, do you think an organization can survive without doing special events to raise funds?
I think so.
There are a number of them, right,
Yes.
that are out there?
I think you increase your major gifts efforts and solicitations and really build a comprehensive major gifts program. But yes, I do think that an organization can survive without major special events. I think you still need to have, your smaller cultivation events, but definitely it's possible.
Carla Jones Adams wants to know, how did we come up with comedy acts for fundraising? It seems innovative. So I think that I don't know, you and I have both our organizations have been doing it for a while.
For years.
Yeah.
For many years.
But no one else is really doing that, I think. It's just, and we've had music, and you guys are going to music, right?
We're going to music.
We moved to Kool and the Gang and the Temptations, but we're back to comedy this year. So.
Well, I think our board and our executive committee really likes the music and having a really fun band there so that it really engages the audience and it gives, your attendees a reason to stay until the very end.
Yeah. I can tell you the year that we had Kool and the Gang was by far the best year.
The best.
It was. Did you go to that one?
I did not. Well, last year with Party on the Moon, at the end of the night, there were still people on the dance floor surrounding their stage. I mean, people had such a wonderful time.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice when you just have a good party like that. So Valerie Garate wants to know, what qualities do you look for in a potential board member? Your ideal board member, Tara?
Someone who has a passion for the mission, someone who has capacity or a pretty influential sphere of influence. And when you look for a potential sphere of influence, good sphere, give us an example of what that is. Someone who has influence in different sectors, business sectors of the community. Someone who's not afraid to pick up the phone and call in a favor, because many of them support their friends or their colleagues or their peers. And so someone who has the ability to pick up the phone and call and ask for that favor to be returned.
I was talking the other day with someone too, and owners of medium and small businesses or CEOs of medium all seem to be very good board members as well, right? They have a lot of influence. They know about leadership. I always like them as board members,
Yes.
right? I mean, CEOs of big corporations are good too. But
I think you need one or two really influential And then for the other positions, just really focus on, individuals that have a passion for the mission. And again, with the nature of work that we do, it's really important that someone who's coming in or joining our board really understands the work.
And I don't know if you have this concern in your board, but a lot of times I look for women who are going to be very powerful and speak out, right? Because you have these old white guys a lot of times that are happy to speak out and to be dominant, but I always like women who push back a little bit because they bring a very different voice. But I almost find like sometimes I have to tell women, I want you because I want your voice. I mean, have you ever...
Well, we'd actually...
You're a little bit different maybe.
Yeah, we'd like to actually identify more men to serve on our board.
Yeah, so it's maybe the opposite, right?
Yes.
Don't be afraid to speak out.
Yes.
So, Julie Voss wants to know, how did you handle damage control with donors after a controversial gala? Do you know Julie, by the way?
That name sounds really familiar.
Yeah, she's at Memorial Hermann.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we sent out an email to all attendees. Our CEO made personal phone calls. I made personal phone calls. The board chair made personal phone calls apologizing. It blew over really quickly.
Yeah.
But we immediately reached out apologizing in a letter via email and followed up with phone calls.
Do you work very closely? Someone asked, do you work very closely with other Houston organizations?
We do. We have MOUs with over 60 organizations.
Mary Ramsey Jones, how does the board deal with a problem board member? I've had problem board members, right? Bomb throwers, I often call them, people like who want to be disruptive all the time.
I haven't experienced that.
Oh, wow, you've been lucky.
Where I am currently.
Yeah.
There is one place that that I worked, and a board member used to bring an ink pen with a recording device in it.
That seems odd.
He's no longer a board member there.
I often find that board members don't want to deal with board members that are problems. This is always my problem.
It's always the CEO's responsibility.
Yeah, that's what happens. So Edith Rahamian wants to know, do you ever have fundraising events or activities that don't yield the results you were hoping for? It seems like I have them all the time.
Our gala, over the past 3 years, hasn't necessarily yielded the results. But I think there's a shift here in Houston where, because there's so many special events and galas in particular, so basically from March through the middle of May, on every Friday and Saturday night, there's 3 or 4 galas in the city, and I think a lot of people are just gala'd out.
Yeah, I'm finding that as well.
We've noticed a trend over the past 3 years where the revenue has definitely decreased.
So when an event that everyone's tired of still nets $200,000 or $300,000 or more, is money better spent by taking all the staff that would have worked at that and having them look at individual giving? I mean, indeed, could you cancel an event with a focus on raising $200,000, and would it be better spent?
I think you could. I think it would take a couple of years of planning, and laying the groundwork, because last year's gala netted $475,000. That's a lot of revenue to make up. I think it can be done. However, you have to plan for it, and you have to plant those seeds so that you're not just completely, you don't decimate a budget, because where's that $475,000 going to come from?
The other thing that I like about events is that they introduce a lot of new people. Now, it could be that the chairs just bring people, and those people won't come back. They'll just follow the chairs to the next party. But if you do a good job as an organization in reaching out to everyone who's come to your event, and if indeed they've learned about the mission, right? If I, as the CEO, did a great speech and they like, well, it sounds pretty good, and then people reach out, you can get new people. But the mistake that a lot of organizations do is not doing that follow-up, right?
Well, you have to follow up immediately following an event. I think we've done a very good job of doing that. I think we could do a slightly better job. I think we do a really good job of reaching out to the main sponsors, so the main table sponsors. I think we have to get better at reaching out to every individual that's there, that's seated at those tables.
Yeah, very good. So Jane Walter wants to know, 7 months seems like a long time for a role to be vacant.
Yes.
What were you not finding in applicants?
The ability to write. I mean, it's a foundations and corporations position. So that's a very specific skill set. And we had to find the best candidate. That was far more important to me than putting a warm body in the position.
There are a lot of organizations that say that they're grant writing sort of consultants. Have you ever used any of those, and how good are they?
We've never used grant writing consultants in a major capacity. I have outsourced 2 proposals, but I'd prefer having a paid staff member on the team.
And do you know about the 3 Gs for the board?
What are they?
So I don't know. Mary Ramsey is asking about the 3 Gs for the board: give, get, and
Get off, maybe?
or get off. That's it, right? Give, get, or get off.
Yes.
So do you follow that, where you tell board members to get off if they're not giving and getting?
We have.
That
I think
wasn't
sometimes, depending on the board member and the relationship, it's a very delicate situation, and you have to choose your battles wisely.
Yeah, I find board members are easily offended, even if they haven't given for a whole year or 2 years. And when you say, I know your term is up and I know you probably can't, oh no, I really want to do this. And it's hard. It's a hard sort of conversation.
It's a very difficult conversation, and we take into consideration the fact that, you know, that board member can influence others in the community. And, you know, again, you have to be very delicate when you're asking someone to step down.
Sherry Cavallari, I think this is her name, wants to know, how do you select your board members?
Many come based on, or actually the majority of our current board have come to us based on referrals from other board members.
And that's mostly how you get them, referrals?
Yes.
Does that work well for you? I mean, I wonder, because we talk about this a lot, how board members sometimes just select people that are there.
Just like them.
Just like them or lower, right? And they don't usually select higher. So do you find that your board sort of stays the same when you do that?
I think that there is the potential for the board to remain the same, and you end up with, in our case, there are quite a few lawyers on the board. I think there's a need to diversify our board, and so we're starting to have some of those conversations about how do we attract others to the board.
Yeah. Kyle Dudzinski wants to know, what's the most creative fundraiser you've ever seen? They're all doing a presentation on this, so everyone is listening very
Actually,
closely.
I was in this class last year where one of the students presented an underwater fundraising. I can't remember her name, but it was an underwater fundraising event.
Yeah, like they stayed underwater,
Yes.
scuba or
I don't know how practical that is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were they playing cards or something underwater? Or
Yes, I think they were. It was either checkers, chess, or cards.
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
it was pretty
Yeah,
creative.
that's creative. So Jordan Klein wants to know if you could give all of us just one piece of advice as future nonprofit management people to take away, what would it be? This is your sage advice. We've climbed the mountain. Tara Black is there on the top. What is your sage piece of advice?
Don't take it personal. I think there are a lot of people that don't succeed in fundraising because they take the no's or the rejection very personally, and it's never personal. No today is not no tomorrow. I've had plenty of people tell me no that over the span of getting to know them better have had a complete, reversal in their decision to give. And so I don't ever take it personal. And I think the second piece of advice would be the relationship building piece of it is critical. You know, it's really critical.
And that's probably good advice no matter what, isn't it? Right?
No matter
that
what.
whole relationship building piece. Letitia Taylor wants to know, how difficult is it for an organization that serves people with very confidential matters to have fundraisers?
It hasn't been difficult
Yeah,
for us.
right.
You know, we're pretty unique in that we also have a 120-bed shelter where we're able to bring potential funders out to see this facility to help them make the connection. And so it hasn't really been much of a challenge.
That's good. Kenyatta wants to know, how has the public responded to Houston Area Women's Center initiatives?
I think the public has been very responsive. I think that there's some work that we can do on brand awareness and marketing to a much wider audience, and we've just recently hired a chief marketing officer. And so I'm really excited to see what some of her ideas are going to be, because I think it will definitely have a direct impact on fundraising.
What's the reason, what's the passion for a board member for the Houston Area Women's Center? Is it, I mean, if you could stereotype it, is it someone who is truly believes in women and empowering women, or what is it? Where's their passion lie?
It's that we have board members that have personal stories that would just blow you away. They themselves have been victims, or they know people personally that have been victims of domestic or sexual violence.
Wow. And are there, I mean, at Children at Risk, we look at other organizations and we, you know, mostly they're our friends, but in a sense they're our competitors for funds. That I don't know that we see them as competitors, but who are your friends / competitors like that in the Houston market, would you say?
Every other nonprofit in the city. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this stat, but there are over 18,000 nonprofits in Houston. So we're all competing in essence for the same dollars. You know, we're just lucky that Houston is a very philanthropic city.
Yeah, that's true. It is a very philanthropic city. Jordan Klein has another good question. What are the best and worst parts of your job?
Loading a U-Haul truck at 4:30 a.m. on
Bad
race
part.
day.
That's a bad part.
Not a fan of that. The best part of my job is really my team. I have such an amazing team of people that I work with. I have huge respect for each and every one of them, and I really enjoy the donor interaction. You know, I'd like to spend the majority of my time interacting with current and potential donors.
Do you have favorites?
Yes, but don't tell anyone.
But I do too. It's sort of a, you know, there's some people
by
who
default.
just, yeah. You know, what is your, like when you're with your favorites, Tara, what is that relationship all about? I mean, you know, for me, you know me well enough, I'm teasing them, you know, I'm having a good time. How do you develop your relationships?
It's very organic. I think there's such a personal element to it where not only do you get to know them and their family, but they get to know you and oftentimes your family and what makes you tick.
So they get to know your husband, Dwight?
They get to know my husband, Dwight.
He's sort of a knucklehead, isn't he?
Yes, he's very entertaining.
So Jen Luke Cook wants to know, what are your feelings about the Better Business Bureau? Some organizations have refused to work with them.
Well, we've always gotten really high ratings, so I don't really have an opinion one way or the other.
Are there future plans for the Houston Area Women's Center to expand since Houston is so large?
So that's a really interesting question.
Good.
We are in year 3 of a 4-year strategic plan, and we're actually in the process of finalizing some of those decisions. But perhaps a satellite center.
And so if you were to do a sell, would you like go out to the suburbs somewhere? Is that what
We've
you would do?
identified a community.
Yeah. And are there, like, does Galveston have their own Galveston Area Women's Center?
They do not.
They don't. And Woodlands, do they have? I mean,
There's Montgomery County.
Montgomery has one.
There's a women's center and shelter there. There's Bay Area, Turning Point. There's Fort Bend.
Okay.
So there's several in the outskirts of the city. But we are the largest provider of the services that we offer in Houston.
And when you look around the country, where's the biggest area women's center? Where's the biggest women's center like Houston Area Women's Center in different cities? Or ones that you look as models?
What I've seen is that, and it's really surprising that in Houston proper, there's only the Houston Area Women's Center, whereas in Chicago, there could be 6 or 7 centers that do the same work. Or New York or San Francisco.
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting.
Yeah. We talk about so many nonprofits in Houston, but I when I think sort of in my area as well, you see the same thing. So in New York City, there are a number of them, while in Houston, there's just the one.
Now, there are some agencies that offer some of the services that we provide, but we're the largest comprehensive. So there's both residential and non-residential counseling. There's a 120-bed shelter. There's a 24-hour hotline, which is the entry point into the agency and the services that we provide. Something that's really unique to the Houston Area Women's Center, and actually to other centers across the country, is our children's court services system.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's interesting. John Bogucki wants to know, what are the ideal characteristics of a 5-star development director? I'm assuming on a 5-star system.
Someone who is patient, someone who is willing and eager to learn, someone who first and foremost puts the team first, someone with extremely thick skin, and someone with just a positive overall attitude about life in general.
Yeah, that's an important part, isn't it? Because a lot of stuff will go wrong, but the whole idea of being positive, people like to be around positive people.
Yes, and I've learned that typically, mistakes happen, things happen. There hasn't yet been anything that I haven't been able to recover from.
Yeah.
And so I keep a relatively positive outlook. It's really important for me as Chief Development Officer because that's what my team is seeing.
Do you laugh a lot within your
Yes.
team? Yeah.
I have to.
Is it mostly people laughing at you, or are you laughing with people?
There's a combination of
Right.
the two.
Because in my office, it's mostly laughing at me.
I'm okay with either or. I'm really clumsy. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm really clumsy. So they'll sometimes hear me stumble in the hallway. I haven't fallen yet. But yes, I laugh a lot.
Very good. So Elsa Flores wants to know, looking back on your job experiences, what would you say are some of the missed opportunities? Have you had missed opportunities? That's a hard question, isn't it?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I don't think I've had any. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at, just my experience and my resume and the fact that I've taken so many risks in my career and I've had such amazing opportunities, I don't think I've had any missed opportunities.
That's good, right? Have you ever had to, Julie Voss wants to know, have you ever had to turn down a gift or return it based on donor restrictions? Isn't that hard sometimes to get to? I've had to turn back gifts.
I am thinking through, well, actually not a gift, but we had to reject a potential chair. And I can't go into any details or everyone would know who and what, but we had to say no to a potential chair because of that person's background and some other things.
Wow, interesting. I've had where there were debates between people who wanted to be chair. And I've tried really hard now to have a slate early on, knowing who's going to be the chair. So.
I haven't had that as a problem here. Actually, it's really been a challenge identifying chairs for special events.
Well, when the people fighting to be the chair aren't the people you want, it's more problematic. This final question before we go to our fun question. Maya Bean wants to know, how do you include your board of directors when you're doing sort of a fundraising session? How do you include them in the discussion?
In a fundraising session or a specific...
Like a retreat? You talked about the retreat that you have.
Well, we've spent, over the past 2 years, we've actually dedicated time at the annual board retreat. So last year we were very honored to have Ann Murphy,
she's
who's
great.
with Deanie
She's been here.
Spheris, who actually came out and conducted a session on philanthropy. And we have an upcoming retreat that will really center around fundraising around the 40th anniversary, which is next year. And I'd say close to a third of our board will participate.
Wow, very good. So now to the hardest questions of the evening. Your favorite restaurant in Houston?
So right now, my favorite restaurant is not in Houston. It is in Pearland, where I live, Grazie.
Grazie? I've heard
Italian,
of it. I knew
great.
there were like 2 restaurants in Pearland that I liked, but I didn't know there was a third.
It's phenomenal. There's a speakeasy section of the bar there, and my husband and I frequent it on a regular basis.
Good. Now, have you been to that barbecue place?
Killian's, yes, they're phenomenal as well.
Yeah, they're really good. Yeah. Apparently, J.J. Watt really likes it too, right?
Actually, J.J. Watt is a fan of Grazie as well.
Does J.J. Watt live in Pearland?
Yes, he does.
All right.
And Jadavion Clowney.
Oh, wow. Like they're all, Pearland is just...
Yes.
Just the happening place, huh?
It's the happening place.
Are there any sort of secret places in Houston that you think, wow, this is a great little secret venue, park?
I'm going to be really selfish here and say again, it's not in Houston, it's in Pearland, and that would be home.
So you like hanging out at home?
I love
How
spending
often?
time
So tell
at
me
home.
about, because I haven't asked this question in a while, work-life balance. I've had so many people who in this seat, and certainly in my seat, I don't really have work-life balance. Do you have work-life balance?
There is no work-life balance.
So
you find your moments,
yeah,
but there really isn't work-life balance.
I think about work all the time. Do you find the same?
Yes, I don't sleep very well, which is not healthy. I often wake up 2, 3 a.m. thinking about work-related projects or something that I forgot to do the day before or something that needs to be done. And I think I've developed high anxiety over the years working in development, but I still love what I do.
Do you think in the world of nonprofit that the development director and the CEO are the people that get the least amount of sleep because they're worried more?
Yes.
Yeah, it's high stress, isn't it?
It's very high stress.
Why do we love it?
I think it's more about just the greater good of our community and being able to give back, and that's our way of giving back.
Yeah. So when they do the Tara Black story in Hollywood, who's going to play you, Tara?
Angela Bassett.
Of course, she always does.
Always does.
I heard that the story is in prep right now, that they're thinking of the Tara Black story. It's a scintillating story of a woman living in Pearland, Texas, who works
Actually,
in Houston.
Gabrielle Union is going to play me in my younger years, and then Angela Bassett as I age.
I think you can't go wrong with either one.
You can't go wrong with either one.
Tara, thanks for all the work that you do in our community. Thanks for being here with us tonight in class.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we will see you guys next time here at the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Until then, keep up the great work. See you next time.